Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Prepper Talk Radio. This is radio for the ready-minded. We're the podcast for the prepared, and we're excited tonight because we're going to dive deeper into ham radios than we have in a while. And we're doing it a little bit better, I think, than we usually do because we're bringing on an expert. Tonight, we've got Joe. He's actually one of the members of our group on Facebook. He has corrected me on a number of things, which I'm very appreciative of. And that was what actually sparked us getting him on. We're like, you know what? You know better than I do. Let's have you on the radio. So want to welcome him. Thank you for taking time to be with us. Thank you for being part of the group. And you've got a pretty cool background that makes you way more of an expert on this than we are. So we're glad to have you on the show. Thank you for being here, Joseph.
I'm glad to be here and be able to talk. Yeah, I've been a ham radio operator for going on almost 10 years, but I've been in the communication industry for going on 20 years.
And you started that, you mentioned you were in the Air Force doing that, then you were National Guard, and you were doing mostly microwave communications. Is that, this is where I'm like, I have no idea how that works.
Okay, so microwave is actually beaming a digital signal from tower to tower. It's almost like your satellite dish for DirecTV. It's beamed from the satellite down to your house.
And what you mean by microwave, it means just a small wave, right? Especially compared to like a ham radio. You're talking UHF, VHS, you're talking 70 centimeters or 2 meters. The actual length of that wavelength, right? To get a little bit technical, that is the actual size of it. And when you get into HF, you get into much taller wavelengths. If you're looking on them on, say, like an oscilloscope or so forth, where you can actually see that wavelength, and that's how you get over mountain ranges and so forth. And
the wavelength isn't tall as it is wide.
Wide, okay.
So 2 meters means that wave is 2 meters.
2 meters between the waves, like
between
this.
The waves.
Okay. Not necessarily the height, but the width of the wave.
Right. So 2 meters is 140 megahertz.
Mm-hmm.
And microwave is up in the gigahertz range. And then HF is down in the kilohertz and low, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 megahertz range, all the way up to 20 or 30 megahertz, 50 megahertz.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it's split up, is the frequency is in bands.
Right. And we as citizens are only allowed access to certain frequencies without licensing. You still need a license for ham radio, right? But there are also commercial bands. Each of the companies are licensed their own frequencies to operate on and correct. And obviously this is not terribly important information for the everyday ham user, but I think it gives a nice picture of your background of actually how this whole system works. We are only allotted a small range of frequencies for us to operate on from the wonderful FCC, correct? I mean, that
is correct.
Gives us the permission to operate on their frequencies, which somehow they decide they own, right? And can license and give permission to, right? So
everything out there that uses any kind of radio communication has a frequency span or band. Aircraft, marine, private enterprise, emergency communications, they have specific bands, almost exactly like let's see if I still have it,
like police, EMS, so on and so forth.
And they use these bands to talk. It's licensed for them. So your ham license gives you permissions to be able to operate certain modes in certain bands, depending on what level of licensing you have. So a technician has, a small amount of capability or able to use, but then when you go to the general class, that opens up a bigger section of those frequencies. And then when you get the advanced extra license, that opens them all up for you to be able to use both analog and digital modes. You can use it all.
Now, for those of you guys who are listening in, or if you're watching on YouTube, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about ham. We're going to talk about emergency communications, and we're going to talk about like things you can and can't do from an expert's opinion. And so it's going to give you a little bit broader range of things. What we just dived into may have gone in one ear and out the other, but don't go away because it's going to get really cool. This is a topic that intrigues me. I'm currently working on my ham licensing. I'm actually, we just talked about a resource before we got online, but I'm doing it at hamradioprep.com, and you can use the code PrepperTalk to save if you decide to go there. But we're also going to talk about another one. It's what's the website you brought up?
Hamtest.org.
Hamtest.org, which is the one that you used.
Yep.
And both sites have all the questions that are on the test, but you can actually get the questions and the flashcards easily on hamtest.org. Did I say that right?
Yeah. So there's a pool of questions for these tests. That's what the FCC uses to test you. Is they take, like, I think for the technician license, there's like 100 or 150 questions. Of that, that's where they pull your 35 or so questions for your test. Same thing with general. There's a pool of 150 to 200 questions, and they pull from those questions. Hamtest.org actually has the flashcards, and so does your ham test, or your ham site has the questions for the test, and those are what they're going to question you on.
Yeah, hamradioprep.com is the other one.
Is it hamexam.org or
test.org? I've got it here.
Yeah, just not coming up for me.
Right there. Hamstudy.org.
Hamstudy. Okay.
So we're showing it up on the screen for you guys that are watching on YouTube. You'll see this. For those not, we'll add it to the notes when we publish this on our podcast. But hamstudy.org.
And you've got your different levels: the technician level, the general level, and the amateur extra level. And you select those, and then it goes in, and you can do study mode or practice tests. Study modes, you can continue as a guest. You don't have to pay for it. And then you can go through and you can do the flashcards.
Nice.
So it really doesn't cost you anything.
Well, the cool thing is like, for those of you listening, like, you can hop on a ham radio and listen. You can't broadcast without a license, but you can listen. And that's great because you can listen in an emergency situation or not. But in an emergency, you're authorized to actually broadcast in an emergency situation. So, for example, the hurricanes we just had, you would be authorized in an emergency situation to call for help on a ham radio.
Well, and I think we need to understand that is why these channels are actually given to the public for emergencies. I mean, this is for emergency communication, and that's what these organizations are kind of focused and oriented around is emergency response in particular. Am I wrong there, Joe?
No. In emergency situations, you have the ARES network, and you have the different. Your ARES network is really a group of hams in your area that have to deal with, whenever the weather gets real bad, they all talk and try to keep updated as a secondary way to update emergency services. So if emergency services lose their radio, the ARES guys help with their ham radio network to talk back to these guys. They even actually sit in the emergency operations center at most of the, county departments when an event is hitting.
Yep.
So they're really pretty good here in the state of Mississippi. They work with MEMA, the Mississippi Emergency Management Agency, and they can talk throughout the state back to MEMA. They've actually got a ham at MEMA, and each one of the counties has ham operators talking back and forth, sending information.
That's awesome. That's way cool. So yeah, so let's kind of broaden the range of what we're talking about as far as the different radios. So you were going to show us some of the radios you have.
Yeah,
let's talk about kind of how those setups work and what our options are, because at the end of the day, we're doing this podcast to help people understand you've got alternate methods for communication in emergencies. If your cellular system goes down, right, and you don't have a phone line out of the house because that's on a different network, but if those are both down, these are some great options we're going to cover.
Right. We're always advocating using the PACE, PACE, primary alternative. Now I'm blanking on it. Contingency and emergency plans, and your primary would be your cell phone, right? Your maybe alternate would be something online, and then contingency would be maybe it's your ham radio would be your contingency, and then you'd have an emergency as well. So this is one of the reasons why, in my opinion, and for myself, why it's important to be able to at least have a ham radio. Like you say, don't necessarily need to have a license if you don't intend to, use it regularly, which I think most hams don't, right?
No, I'm very rarely on the ham
yeah
frequencies because I've got all kinds of other stuff going on. But when everybody pretty much knows the good old Baofeng UV5R. They're a great cheap radio. They can talk usually between 1 and 3 miles and stuff like that. They're great for private stuff. Technically, the new ones that you're getting off Amazon now, they are restricted to the ham frequencies, but there's actually a way to factory default it, and then you can use certain frequencies outside of that.
Right.
Another good one are these FRS, GMRS radios. Now, those are dedicated 20 or so channels that talk back and forth. They're programmed specifically for that. They're kind of like a CB radio. So anybody that has these radios can talk on any one of those frequencies, just like CB radios.
More like a family use. I mean, that's kind of the way they license it as a family license and so forth.
And they're good for 1 to 2 to 3 miles tops.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you get into the UHF and the VHF range on your Baofeng and you're in ham, you have repeaters out at the towers that will actually extend those signals out 25, 30 miles.
Mm-hmm. So, and as you learn how to access those, which you typically need to join a local club who manages those, who owns those, and you pay a small fee, and then you can participate and get a lot of help and so forth with and the codes to dial in. And there's a lot of benefits of definitely being part of a club.
And usually they don't charge anything.
Okay. So, I know that our local clubs have a very small fee, and that's just kind of maintain the repeater and so forth, because there's some expenses that way. But it's not like a for-profit organization or anything like that. Yeah.
And they're the ones that give you your tests. Usually, like when I took my test, it was $15. You test until you fail. So if you test technician and you pass it, go ahead and take your general. If you pass that, then go ahead and take your amateur extra. And if you fail that, then you fall back to a general, and that's what you're licensed as.
Okay, cool.
So don't just study technician. Also study the general and the advanced extra, because it helps you all the way across the board.
Now, does that really benefit like the regular, the average Joe, no pun intended there, Joe, to actually go up from a technician, or am I going to be perfectly fine just being a technician? Because I really haven't, really have the desire to go up and get a general. But that's required for like HF, for the higher frequencies.
Well, it's actually the lower frequencies, yes. But
excuse me, yes, HS, see, high frequency, but it's actually lower frequencies. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's part of it. Is you are limited to remember that PDF I shared that showed the ham bands?
Mm-hmm.
You have that?
I can pull it up. It'll take me a minute.
That if you look at that PDF, that will show you who is able to talk in certain frequency bands. There are bands that technicians cannot talk on. They're not allowed, because they're license level. So it's actually better to go as high as you can.
Okay.
And open things up.
Just get it done.
Just get it done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And your license is good for like 10 years.
Right. And then all you got to do is pay your fee and then renew it for another 10 years. And it's,
or take another test and get a higher level. Like my license is expiring next December. So I plan on taking amateur extra this coming year.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. I've been licensed since about 94. And so that tells you how lax I have been on my ham radio study, as I'm still just a technician.
That one there is the frequency allocation for the entire United States. That has air frequencies, TV frequencies, radio frequencies, radio stations. That one there is the breakdown of all the frequency bands allowed in the United States. The next one, you do the other one, is the ham one.
Okay, let me find the ham one.
It should be the very next one. It should be a PDF file in there. It's a, let me see if I've got it. I know I've got it right here. Let's see. I know I've got it right here. There we go.
You got it up?
Yeah, I got it up.
There we go. Okay, yeah.
So this is the actual ham bands and frequencies. Your 2 meters right here at one, that's where UHF or VHF starts, is right around there, the 144. Then it's up to the 70 centimeter, which is UHF. So VHF here, as you start going down at 50 megahertz and below, is considered HF. And if you look right here, this is the frequency for an extra. This is a frequency for an amateur extra. A general can only use these. He's got to skip this. And a novice and technician can't talk on this because the green is audio or analog. And then that's to be able to talk and stuff like that. These little squiggly lines is for CW, which is Morse code. And the novice and technician can only use Morse code on this band in between these two frequencies.
Now the red is the data, right?
Red is data, and green is actual analog talking.
That's one of the things as I started studying for my ham, I was kind of blown away. I knew you could send data. I had no idea how much data could be sent and how easy it was to do.
Yes.
And the way they use repeaters, I mean, it's just fascinating.
You can actually, there are ham radio repeaters and stuff that are tied to the internet to where you can send and receive emails and stuff like that. There's all kinds of stuff you can do.
That's amazing.
My radio that I have is capable of doing wires X, which wires X I equate to basically the old AOL chat groups where you go into one room and then it breaks down into 15 or 20 other rooms to go talk to people. It's pretty interesting. Once you get on that digital mode, you get a whole, you get a main room, and then it breaks down into various different other rooms that you can go into, and you can sit there and talk back and forth.
Now, you showed us online a resource where you can start listening into these different channels here. But I also wanted to ask you, there's a lot of talk about Baofengs are quite popular because of the cost, the inexpensive level to get in. Are those worth just starting out with, or would you say start out and get something nicer like an ICOM or a Yaesu that's the higher quality? Are we going to have better luck starting out? Because obviously you get on, say, Amazon and you look at the different reviews, and there's some fairly high percentage of poor reviews. And
yes, you got to,
in my opinion,
it's a $20 to $30 radio. Okay, it does what it was intended for. It's not the greatest at long distance communication, and it's kind of scratchy, and but it works. The great thing about it is I know those radios. We go out into the woods all the time camping, with our group over here. One guy lost his radio out on the hike into the woods, and we found it a year later. We cleaned it up after being rained on and everything else. We cleaned it up, put a brand new battery in it, and it worked.
It still worked. Nice.
It still worked. So the Baofengs, don't let anybody tell you that they're terrible, but they ain't the greatest.
Yeah.
But you don't need to spend high dollar to do any of this. That's the thing.
Until you get into the HF and so forth.
Yeah, until you
that's
get into
the money.
HF and the digital modes, then it's a hobby. If you get out of a hobby what you put into it. If you want to just listen, you don't really have to spend any money. If you want to talk and listen, yeah, you need to get licensed and you need to be able to, have some kind of a device to be able to communicate.
Yeah.
Whether that's the Baofengs or not, that's okay. The great
and I think
thing about Baofengs are they're capable of a lot more than just what they are allowed here in the United States. So when you get the ones from Amazon now, they are locked down to the ham frequencies. But there's a video out there on Facebook or
YouTube
that shows you how to unblock them or unlock them with a factory default. And then you can go outside the hams for even talking with fire departments, even talking with sheriff's departments if they're still in the VHF, UHF range.
Right. In an emergency, right?
Well, yeah, in an emergency. But if you're on a fire department and you can't afford a $1,000 radio,
right.
But you can get this Baofeng for $30 and then you can program it because you're on the fire department. You can talk on that frequency.
And I guess as a disclaimer, I know that my personal experience, those like the search and rescue and so forth, they definitely frown on you breaking your radio into those frequencies. So I think maybe there is a little bit of legal issue with doing that. Am I right or am I wrong?
If you are a valid volunteer firefighter on that fire department, you have all rights to use that frequency, whether you're licensed or not.
But is breaking or modifying a radio, is there anything legally wrong with that?
No, there's not anything illegal with it, but it's you're using it for the purpose that it was used for. Right. Especially if you're a volunteer firefighter.
Right. Okay.
So, cool. Say you run an event, a preparedness expo, and you reprogrammed some ham radios and dumbed down the bandwidth, dumbed down everything, and ran it on FSR.
FRS on the FRS frequency.
Yeah, FRS. Sorry, FRS frequencies. I got some ham radio guys telling me, "Hey, that's cool." Other guys were like cursing me out. What's your take on that, Joseph?
You can. I mean, with these Baofengs, you can run the FRS frequencies and you can run the GMRS frequencies. You have to program it to do it, and some of them are already programmed to do that.
Yeah, the ones we bought weren't programmed, but we had a guy that could program it all, so he just like, "Hey, I'll do it."
Yeah,
like,
it's a radio. It's awesome. No different than buying an FRS radio or a GMRS radio.
Yeah. And they're much higher quality than your typical GMRS or FRS radios, which are very low quality. They're very cheap. Baofeng is definitely more complex that way. And my 2 cents is, if you can afford it, I would say just step up and get a quality radio like an ICOM or Yaesu or Kenwood or something like that. For maybe the prices have really come down since I started. It was kind of cost prohibitive at first. Back 25 years ago. Now you can get into these really good quality ones for $100, $120, $150.
Right.
And so that's my advice: is get something quality up front. Baofengs, like you say, I've never owned a Baofeng, but that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, and your voice quality and the transmission is better on those radios than these. Okay.
Let's take a pause from that and let's share the screen that you got up here right here. Tell us a little bit more about this. This is a really cool tool.
Okay.
If you're listening to the podcast, hop over on YouTube and watch the video on this section. This is a pretty sweet little tool.
So this here is what's called WebSDR. Okay. If I go back to the main page, and I'll show you here, Let's back up.
WebSDR.org.
WebSDR.org. And you can come in here and you can choose different portions of the world. So right here, I chose North America. And then I came down here to this northern Utah because that's where you guys are. And you can choose that link. And here you can go into all these different bands on the ham to listen. So I chose this green one. You can actually listen to AM broadcasts and FM broadcasts and everything. But you come in here, you choose this. Let me turn the volume down so I'm not squelching everybody. Now, what this is this is what's called a waterfall. Where those bright lines are people talking. They're on their frequencies. So if I zoom in a little bit, I can grab this and I can go right here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Get it in there. Let me drop it down a little bit, get it on frequency a little bit better, and then turn up the volume.
Do you have a mute on, or?
Let's see. So you can listen to anything.
You can listen to anything. That's what's great about it. And you can tune it. You can tune it just like a ham radio.
So your mouse just became your dial, and you're just moving it.
Your mouse became your dial, and you can go into this stuff.
That's awesome.
Turn the volume down. But you can zoom in and zoom out. So a waterfall helps you to see what frequency people are talking on. When you go down here farther, and you can dial this in.
Unfortunately, we're not getting
digital section.
Unfortunately, we're not getting your computer audio.
Yeah.
But seeing how you're doing this is really impressive.
So right now, I'm at an audio section or a digital section. They're sending and receiving digital data.
Wow. That's cool. So you don't even have to get a radio to start listening.
Correct.
And then depending on your budget, you can look at different options. You know, we got a bunch of Baofeng UV5Rs. So that's kind of where we started. But then I went the route and got my GMRS for our family as our family comms plan, just so I could get a little bit farther without having to license everybody on ham. Because that's one of the unique things about ham is everyone's got to have a license if you're going to be on a radio by themselves.
Technically, yes, they have to be on. They have to be licensed or within the supervision of a licensee.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay. Now we do get a lot of questions about: are there any other ways to do this? I don't want to get a license. I don't know if people are just lazy or what, but we get questions about different devices. Like what's the newest one? Like the Bear Tooth, or what is it called? The different push to talk radios, which I believe mainly work over the cell phone networks.
Yes.
There's really, in my opinion, or my experience, there's really no other way to communicate any kind of long distance without being a ham, and not without working on the cell phone networks, which can easily be compromised. But ham radio is direct radio to radio. You don't, especially if you're HF, you don't necessarily need a tower. Like cell phones will not work without a tower. They don't work phone to phone, right?
No, they don't. So if you want to find information out farther than your local area, so UHF and VHF is local with the help of a repeater. It's still local.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
HF is for, like, I've made contacts on HF. I've talked to Europe from where I'm at. I've talked to Washington State. I've talked to Puerto Rico. I've talked to South America. You know, HF is long distance depending on what band you're talking on. You know, I've talked to Greece from South Mississippi.
Wow.
Direct radio to radio.
Direct radio to radio.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of devices do you use when you're broadcasting that distance? I know you've got your setup. Let's show everybody what you've got.
It's just this simple Yaesu 991A. It's only a 100-watt radio, and I can talk those distances with this radio.
But also connected to the appropriate antenna, right? Because that's obviously incredibly important, having the right antenna. We talk about, these little antennas that are these rubber ducks or whatever you want to call them. And there are lots of different types of antennas, and that's something you'll learn about when you're studying for your ham, or different types of antennas, what's appropriate, and distance and so forth. You'll get out of
and that's part of the hobby of ham, is playing around with different antennas. I've got what's called a tunable screwdriver antenna on my vehicle, which automatically adjusts for the frequency wavelength.
Okay.
And that's how I can get on the different bands.
But you need to have some know-how, maybe some type of tuning equipment in order to do that properly.
Actually, the antenna, once you get it set up, the antenna and the radio tune itself. So when you change the frequency and you hit the button, the antenna will either expand or contract to set itself at the proper VSWR for the frequency you're talking.
Right.
Wow.
Because typically you need to select your antenna for the frequency you're working on, correct?
Right.
Was that a big investment to buy that, or is it pretty?
The antennas can be expensive. I think the antenna that I've got, I bought it used from somebody else, but it typically runs about $300.
Okay.
And then, of course, this radio is, a $1,200 radio. There's a big difference there. You do get what you pay for.
And they go up from there for your HF bands.
Some of them. That's probably on the higher end of the spectrum.
Okay.
But, if you just want to listen, you can get this right here. This is your own SDR, RTL SDR. You can get this off of Amazon and different places and eBay. And this now will be able to plug into your computer, and with a set of antennas and a little sticky cup, you can sit there and you can listen to the different bands. Not only can you do that, but you can plug it into this right here and then plug this into your cell phone.
Oh, wow.
You can actually make your cell phone a spectrum analyzer and look at the different frequencies, and you can listen.
That's cool. Awesome.
If I take my cell phone, I can plug it into the USB jack, and right there, I can sit there and I can start doing stuff on my cell phone with a spectrum analyzer and look what's being transmitted in my area.
And I guess that's the beauty of everything going digital, right? Everything in my days when I started with ham, everything was analog for the most part, as far as I knew at the time. And now you're transmitting data, you're encrypting frequencies, and that's really all done all over the digital network, correct? You can't really encrypt over an analog, as far as I know.
No, you cannot. It is illegal to encrypt your transmission being a ham.
Oh, okay.
Something the FCC will frown severely on is trying to encrypt your communication.
And so there's these other devices, and of course I forget what they're called, but what did I want to say, Scott? They're like the Bear. We were talking about them before. Bear.
It's a.
And those can be
a mesh network.
Mesh network, yes.
There you go.
And those are naturally encrypted, I believe, right?
To some extent, but they're not as encrypted as what you think they are.
Oh, okay.
They're some of them are digital. But here's the greatest thing into the ham market that's came along in the last few years. Anybody know what a Raspberry Pi is?
No, I don't.
This is a complete computer. This is a complete computer in your palm of your hand. This has Wi-Fi and can act as a Wi-Fi hotspot. It has Bluetooth. It has USB and serial and Ethernet ports, and it will plug up to your radio, and you can actually operate your radio from this computer.
Is that a 5G, or do you have to bring your internet into that?
No. This creates its own internet spot
so it's a hotspot.
It's like a hotspot.
Okay.
And it can be connected to the internet, but it's a computer in this little bitty box.
So does
Raspberry Pi, PI,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah, Raspberry Pi, PI.
So does that mean like, so that device itself, you plug that into your whatever else and you're online?
No, not online. Okay.
Okay.
This is a computer to be able to control your ham radio.
Okay, gotcha.
And it can have, you can take a GPS unit and plug into it, and you can take this SDR and plug into it, and you can do your own waterfall effect to see that stuff. But it has its own built-in Wi-Fi so that you can hook up your cell phone and control it from your cell phone or a tablet via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. It's a really neat tool to play with.
So in other words, you can be as geeky and nerdy as you want with ham radio and these devices like the mesh networks and so forth, which are, I think, getting more and more larger networks, because I think that depends on having multiple devices to create that network in these mesh-tastic and whatever networks.
Yeah, well, what's cool about the Raspberry Pi is you can run Windows and Linux programs on it. So, like, if you don't know Morse code, you can bring up a program on that Raspberry Pi, and you type your message and send it in Morse code without even knowing how to do Morse code.
And then on the other end, you could receive it and translate it.
Yes.
Awesome. That is awesome. That's very cool.
That is very helpful.
I'm starting to geek out here, a little nerd out here. This is pretty cool.
It's a hobby. It's fun, and you can go, into the alphabet soup of different digital and analog, realms as you want to go
down the rabbit hole.
One of the fun games that they play is called fox hunting, where the local hams will send somebody out in the middle of nowhere with a radio, and the rest of the group has to triangulate their position based on their signal, and they hunt the fox.
Now that brings up another question that we got, when you posted a question in the group about what questions are out there, we did get one question. Maybe we want to bring that up here, Scott, if we can get to that, about triangulating, finding, the concern about when you're broadcasting that you can be tracked, right? That your position can be triangulated, you can be found, and that's absolutely true.
Yes, that's absolutely true with any RF signal.
Right. And I think his question was
$10,000 piece of equipment for work that I can get out here with a Yagi antenna, and I can go around in circles, and it'll point me in the direction of where they're at.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess part of his question there is, let's read that here. Other than triangulating the source of a radio, is there any identifying feature, excluding a call sign, that can track the radio signal? So I'm guessing that's, is he talking about just receiving? Because obviously when you're transmitting, that's obviously pretty easy for someone who knows what they're doing, has the right equipment to track you down. But when you're receiving, if I'm understanding that question correctly, is
I kind of read it a little bit different, because if you're sitting on an HF rig, you don't know where people are talking. Okay. But with this SDR and a set of antennas and the waterfall on your computer, you know where to dial your frequency and to start listening to people.
Okay. And a directional antenna, you can kind of tell the direction it's coming from. And
well, in the HF realm, it's like what I described before, throwing the rock in the water in the pool, and it just travels out in all directions.
Right. And it could be hundreds, thousands of miles away rather than like a
local
VHF, UHF.
You really don't need a directional antenna unless you're doing what's called a Yagi, which is a directional antenna that points in ways. Anything is better than nothing. You can go out there with, 100 feet of wire that you picked up at Home Depot, string it along your fence, hook that up as an antenna, and you can start talking.
That's amazing.
Yeah, pretty cool.
And that's half the fun of the hobby, is seeing what you can use to get how far with it.
And stringing it up in a tree or building your own antenna and so forth. Yeah.
So for those of you guys listening, if you want to learn more, if you have questions on this, please join us in our Facebook group, Emergency Prep and Self-Reliance. We're fortunate to have Joe in there. He's one of our top contributors, especially when it comes to ham radios, but he also has shown us some pretty cool stuff with his grid down clothes washing solution. I have a similar one, and I was like, he showed his, and I'm like, oh, that's brilliant additions. I'm not going to spoil it for you guys on the podcast. You got to join the group to see some of the cool things he's done. Guys, it's a fun group. Get involved. Everyone's teaching each other. And that's the whole point of the podcast, is so we can bring in people like Joe, talk about different things, see what your options are, and really geek out to whatever level of geeking out you want. As you can see, Shane's gotten more and more excited as the podcast has gone on. It's fascinating. I love the world of preparedness. Yesterday, I was in a meeting with my local emergency preparedness community. Like, the city of Bountiful has broken it down into like 81 different little segments. Each of those segments has a block captain. The block captains report up to an incident commander, and they report up to the city. So if there's something that's going on, we know how to check in on everybody in the network door to door through those people. Radio gives you the ability to check on much farther away without having to hightail it all the way over there.
Yeah. And the more people who have radios, the simpler and faster that process is. So get yourself informed, to get yourself a radio to at least listen in. And when it's an emergency, you can push that push to talk button and have no fear of reprisal or retribution, whatever.
Yeah, life is too short. Have fun while you're doing it, and go out into the woods and play prepper. I like to go out to the woods at least once a month. I like, or more. I'm somewhat antisocial. I like being in the woods because the woods is a lot better than dealing with a lot of the public.
The traffic and yeah. I totally agree with you. We're on the same page there.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast this week, guys. You've been listening to Prepper Talk Radio. This is Radio for the Ready-Minded. Any final thoughts that you guys want to share before we call it out for this episode?
Well, I was just going to say, let's push this episode out and get people to comment, in the comment section down below, and start asking questions, and let's get a conversation going and expand this discussion here, because I think we got it. This is a really great start. It's much bigger than we could possibly cover in 42 minutes and 42 seconds.
Oh yeah, we just touched the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's so much you can do with ham radios nowadays that the older ham guys called Elmers never did. They had to know how to do Morse code in order to get their license. They're all upset at us because we don't have to do it anymore.
That's true. Yeah, I didn't have to do that when I got it. And here's another quick tidbit: is that there are certain repeaters that clubs maintain where you can have the code and you can dial from your phone into a regular phone line and make calls.
Yeah.
So that's just one of the many things you can do in addition to transmitting data and so forth. This goes so deep and can really take a lot of your time, or as little time as you want to put into it.
Well, guys, stay tuned. We're going to be talking more in depth on this in the coming months. If you want to get active in the conversation right now, jump into our group on Facebook, Emergency Prep and Self-Reliance. Don't forget to check out the website, preppertalkradio.com. We got some cool updates over there. We've got more information coming every week, and we've got all of our merch up. So if you want to get some Apocalyptimus t-shirts, some Sheepdog t-shirts, or just, the sweet Prepper Talk Sensei Warrior Gardener shirt, check those out over there at preppertalkradio.com. And thank you, Joe, for being on the show. Thank you for being in the group. I'm excited to see the next one we do. Maybe we should do that. Our next one is a live, and actually, hopefully by then I've got my license. We can all hop on our hams and make fun of Paris.
There we go. There we go.
Since he doesn't have his ham yet, and I'll have mine by then. Well, guys, thanks for being ready-minded. Keep that head on a swivel. Stay tuned in and don't tune out. See you on the next episode.
See you next week.
Really
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joe.